but other than that, I'm trying to think if there's anything going on this week. As you know, oh yeah, hey.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Everyday Esoteric. This is our second episode on philosophy of math. So math philosophically speaking. We've been having our own little side riff here, but Martin, you were about to go into something for the past week.
Oh, I've been doing that waking up at 6, just trying to like. I think especially once you get closer to your 30s and you have a house, you have significant others
Closer. Like we aren't
closer.
30.
Yeah, well, at heart, like
Uh-huh.
heart, mind,
Uh-huh.
body.
Right.
Anyway, so as you get older, you just there's just more shit to do in life, and I've just found it easier to find an extra hour in the morning. Like somehow it's just, I guess it's because I'm the only one awake. Even Penny's still asleep, Tatiana's still asleep, so I can just
Yep.
go. I can work out. I can meditate, and then hop in the shower. Versus like an hour or two when I get home from work before anybody else gets home. That's my like decompression time. So I'm finding a balance where I don't have to take like the social component of the relationship, time away from that at the end of the day, especially after a long day when I can just kind of front load my day with healthy habits.
Right. Yeah, I have been I get up at 7, but I like a slow I don't know if I like a slow morning, but I have a slow morning. I get right up at 7. I have a white noise machine that I listen to when I go to sleep, but like I pretty much more or less almost beat my alarm clock every time because my rhythm's pretty good. And I get up, I've got my coffee and my breakfast that I have for the half an hour. You do your morning rituals, so to speak, get my shower and dressed and lunch made and stuff and out the door by typically before 8:30. So a good hour and a half that I'm kind of like not dicking around, but effectively just trying to get the gears moving again. And I feel like there's probably some more efficiency that I could add in there. Like if instead I started by my morning by just waking up and doing stretches and then working out and just slamming back some kind of a mix of my coffee and some sort of like workout supplement, I could probably like get the same effect while still min-maxing off of that, but I don't know. Like maybe that is what I should do is like you just said, front load with the fitness and my morning coffee and everything and just let that maybe get that sort of slow start then when I'm driving into work since I've got that half hour commute.
That's kind of what I do. Like I get up, I spend a couple times. I spend like a couple minutes just doing that, like groggy walking around, like getting limber out of you, after sleeping. And then I go and get on the bike or do whatever I'm gonna do. And then I usually don't have my caffeine until about 2 hours after I wake up. So it's usually right when I get to work, maybe 8:15. That's when I'll have my first caffeine, and then I'm finding I'm doing it out of habit, and then the desire for the flavor of my
Oh yeah,
chosen source of caffeine. Um,
coffee. Love
but
that. Love me some
but
coffee.
that Yeah, but doing that workout in the morning, I feel kind of wakes you up and energizes you. Now I haven't done a dry run where I've just worked out and and then just sat all day. That might be different. Um, but yeah, that's kind of been my routine.
So yeah, so why don't we? I mean, now that we've kind of we talked about our sort of less esoteric rituals and things. I've been the fall semester has gotten in, and I've been doing a little bit of tutoring, and I haven't had to do any math tutoring for anybody, but that we can. I've been doing my comp sci tutoring stuff, but we can segue into our real core topic here today, which was the math and the philosophy of it. Where we left off was talking about conventionalism, and I'd like to just put a little one or two things here, quick little reminder, which is what an axiom is. An axiom being a proposition that is regarded as established and self-evidently true, such as one plus one is equal to two, and the difference between a priori and a posteriori, where a priori is knowledge one can derive solely from reason. The sample statement that we used before was if I have eaten four burritos, then I will have eaten more than three burritos. By the virtue of eating 4 burritos, I know that the amount that I ate was more than one, two, three, or zero, right? A posteriori is knowledge that relies on empirical evidence. So the 4 burritos cost me only $12 cannot be divined from reason alone. You cannot derive the truth of that from that statement. Um, but where we're starting today is less of the air quotes normal ideas and schools of thoughts and more into the esoteric ones and also some of the general esotericness of math itself, starting with things like intuitionism and embodied mind theories. So to start, let's look at intuitionism. The intuitionism motto is that there are no non-experienced mathematical truths. And so this would suggest that anything you can prove to be true with math must exist as something that you can experience. I don't know if you had something you wanted to say
Oh,
about
it's my
that, but you
turn
could
now.
throw in there.
Um, the I was thinking about it because you have more notes as you go
Hmm.
on about like the embodied mind theories. Um, it really reminded me of just regurgitating a lot of the lessons that we learned while going over chicken Kabbalah, where just through the essence of like one understanding that it's one, and then two understanding that it's not one, and so on and so forth, that it creates just uh, I guess whatever needs that those create. There's still some kind of, I guess, mathematical. I said it better down here somewhere. I did actually make some notes,
Well, and I think like
but
that you were those notes are probably better for later, but I mean more so like
yeah,
I
yeah,
think maybe the core thing that wanted to see if you had like a quick little thought on was the idea that anything you can prove to be true with math exists as something to be experienced. And maybe not necessarily like the granular thing of, okay, you can prove that there's one in math because you can look at one phone or one booklet of notepad papers and know that there is one of it and therefore you can experience it. But like the idea that, if the more advanced sort of things. Like if you can prove that something is true with math, it exists as something that can be experienced. So something like how the golden
right,
ratio shows up in Nautilus shells, and we remembered seeing that from Chicken Kabbalah.
right. So not just that, but even I just had a thought. I'm probably gonna end up having to cut this out. Um, yeah, like if there's something that exists in the universe, there's a mathematical explanation for it, and vice versa. So does become like a chicken and the egg sort of scenario. Like we can experience light, or at least the effects of what light
Sure.
does, right? But there's a mathematical equation for every component of our perception of light, so far as we know. So that to me it kind of reminds me of like the pseudoscience idea of like, here's an event that happens, we just don't have the mathematics, the physics, the chemistry, whatever it is to support it.
Well, and I mean, I think maybe that's like what a lot of people, when they do their ghost hunting, that's like sort of their thing. Like, there's a ghost here, but we just don't have the science to prove that there's a ghost here, right? We don't have the ghostometer made by the Ghostbusters to show me to look through the ghostoscope and see the ghost.
Yeah. And then like you have this example of the burritos, like that I ate 4 burritos, and it's either you did or you didn't, right?
Well, and that's we can go into that here now, which is that
Okay.
intuitionists also have their own form of logic that involves the exclusion of the law of excluded middle. And so, like mathematicians and computer scientists and all of these like stupid science jerks have this thing that they call logic that's really important to them because it is how you decide whether or not things are true and how you're able to make decisions on the proof of various things. And the law of excluded middle basically says that for a proposition, um, either that proposition or its negation is true. And to go back to the burritos, the simple example would be I ate 4 burritos. It is either true currently or I didn't eat 4 burritos, in which case then the negation, I didn't eat 4 burritos, is the true statement. And then that's it. There with excluding the law of the excluded middle, a mouthful, means that the negation of a statement doesn't necessarily mean that it's false. It means that it's refutable or that you could prove it to then be true or false, which is a problem that a lot of like the formalist and conventionalist mathematicians have, because a lot of these statements like I ate 4 burritos, either that is true or it isn't. I didn't eat 4 burritos but also not eat 4 burritos. Like I either ate 4 or I didn't.
Right. And I love the intuitionism. Kind of reminds me almost of like a Schrodinger's cat situation
Sure.
where like it's a light switch. It either is or it isn't, but it's in superposition. It's in both states or no states all at once until the thing is observed, and
Right.
then you
And
can
so
definitively say, like, yes, I watched Alex eat 4 burritos, or there's some way to check it, right? Like
right.
I did a blood test on you, and your blood test came back positive for 4 burritos.
Right, exactly. You could use, and that's sort of like what they're saying in this sense, I think, is that like if I said I didn't eat 4 burritos, then the negation of that is that I did, and that it's the negation that I ate 4 of them is refutable, and that you can prove it to be true or false in this case, right? I made a claim that I didn't eat 4 burritos, and that might be true, but then negating it is the I ate for, and then it is refutable. Therefore, somebody could put in the evidence to suggest that the I ate for is actually true or false. Which again, it's just sort of like how they do the logic. And I know that it's a bit, despite it being called intuitionism, it's a little unintuitive for people who are very used to what is effectively normal formal logic, which most people I think do by default. They understand that if something is true, then saying that not something should then not be true. It's a natural, I think, build of logic. Just people understand it. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah, I'd be interested in I'd be interested in seeing how intuitionism influences like other schools of thought and other philosophies,
yeah,
because that's interesting, but it does come down to that, like there's always that something else. You could always like somebody can always make an attempt to show that it's false or true, I guess.
right. And I mean, obviously, listeners, if you've got a view on any of these things, or you feel that one way or another thought is, or one school of thought is more interesting, or I think it's better as far as like how we should be looking at it, like let us know. But we'll look at embodied mind theories, which I think is going to be a lot more interesting in terms of like what we can actually discuss here. And embodied mind theories believe that mathematical thought is a natural outgrowth of the human cognitive apparatus, which finds itself in our physical universe. So, for example, this would suggest that the abstract concept of number would spring from the experience of counting discrete objects. In other words, um, it isn't so far to say that numbers as an abstract object wouldn't exist if there was no one more, like if there was no, if you only ever had one of something, right? If there was more than one of something to experience, then you would be able to understand what numbers are by that virtue, right? Actually, let me re-roll that. So, embodied mind theories believes that mathematical thought is a natural outgrowth of the human cognitive apparatus which finds itself in our physical universe. For example, the abstract concept of number springs from the experience of counting discrete objects, which is to say that it's not far to say that numbers wouldn't exist as an abstract thought without there ever being more than one of something to experience or count. You can take this to the extreme and then suggest that we only ever bothered to evolve such acute perceptions and senses because it was evolutionarily advantageous and may not even really be accurate to true reality. Considering how many types of light, motion, and sound exist that we aren't capable of seeing, feeling, or hearing, you couldn't necessarily just say that this is wrong. And then it kind of spirals from there, calling into question the objectivity of the scientific method, given that we may be limited in what can be measured empirically, as it may not be as reliable as we assume by our own experience.
Great. This is the this is the part that I had some notes on. Because I see this with my, I guess, more agriculture, biology, ecology sort of background. Um, any biological body, in theory, should only adapt to fill a niche in an area with selected pressure. This concept also reminds me of the universe slash God evolving or manifesting things to fulfill a need, similar to what we learned about in whatever various occult topics with the Kabbalah. The diversity in life, whether it be plant or animal life, comes from this sort of competition, and humans are sincerely no different. Um, I don't think that we are the only things that can do math. I believe dogs, birds, and probably dolphins can count somewhat or keep track of a certain number. I mean, they have to know how many of their babies or children are there. I've seen dogs.
Right. I think we talked in the last episode about, like, how does the goose know that one of her goslings is missing
Oh
if she
yeah.
can't do counting? And similar in stature, here's a fun experiment to whether or not you want to see how whether your dog can understand quantity. Try and give the dog a pile of, basically see if you can set up an experiment where you give the dog a pile of treats that's bigger than another pile of treats. And it might be a little harder to get them to do this at first, but see if they can't make a decision on what that is that they want to go to first. And I bet if they observe the larger pile, they're able to figure out that the larger pile is, because maybe they don't know that you aren't going to take the other one away. They might be able to see, oh, this pile is larger. It's got more treats in it for me. I'm going to eat that one because I don't know what might happen to the other one, but that one's bigger and I want more. Which means they know what more is.
Right. So clearly, things that have a certain level of livingness or alive, however you want to say it, like, I don't want to say a cognitive ability, but I
Sentience
guess that would be the
almost.
baseline. Yeah, like there's some form of sentience that's baseline between humans and animals. And if you're listening to this probably as an English speaker, just because you can't speak or understand the language of some of the other culture, it doesn't mean that they're not generally doing the same thing as you and getting the same results. Like at least in this case, it being math. It kind of just becomes a matter of perception. Now the language will change, the order of actions might, but the basics and the results are likely invariably the same. Another weird example that I was able to pull of animals using some type of counting or mathematics is honeybees. They you have these scouts that go out look for flowers or nectar sources. Then they come back to the hive and they describe where that nectar source is by the angle of the sun and the distance to the flowers. And they do this little dance. And how they do that dance dictates effectively the geometry of where that food source is.
That's excellent. That's
It
awesome.
gets a it gets a little weirder too, is the cells in a honeycomb are all hexagons. They have them within a certain size range for the workers, a different size range for what would be drones, and then they have something in between that are honey storage cells. And they measure the cells as they construct it with their antennae. So they're actively applying some type of mathematics
They
when they're doing their construction.
Right, they don't know 1, 2, and 3, and they may not understand, like, actual distances the way we understand distances and sizes and things, but they clearly have something in their brain that tells them that some particular amount of distance between each of these uniform, walls is the correct amount for this thing, and then they know that discreetly some other different size of uniform walls is for something else, and then yet again they know that as well, so that they can differentiate clearly between all three of these. And by the description, it sounds like they're able to encode the angles and distances in their little dance of what is probably, I mean, I would love to. Now, this actually kind of sounds. This is very interesting. I might want to look into this later. But what exactly the B language sort of translates to, in terms of like, if you were to sit and listen to it, how could you discern out that information, and like how well it may map to some actual sort of like number system. Like
Yeah.
let's obviously computers do binary. They do zeros and ones, right? And depending upon the sequences of zeros and ones that you give it, it can do different things. And so and each of these different like sequences we've defined as bits being representing just one numeral, and then bytes being eight. And so if you've got an 8 byte, or if you've got like a something that is a byte long, you've got 8 bits to work with. You've got 256 values you can put in there. But if I wanted to define letters as those 8 byte chunks, right? I could, or 8 bit chunks, I could determine that maybe all zeros is a space to denote that I'm done talking about a discrete like thing, and then those other ones are you can map those to, there's only 26 letters in the alphabet. So I've got
Right.
256 minus 26 leftover spaces, or leftover numbers basically at that point. And so what I'm saying is that like what a bee might be able to do is it may have a variant length of movement that it may do, some discrete amount of movement that it may do when it does its dance. And depending upon how long it does that movement for, or to what like vigor level it does it, may map to some particular, weird B letter. And so by
Right.
doing all that, like doing this very specific dance, and maybe it's like, sort of like how Morse code, you just like, you got long spaces for some part of it, and then short, maybe just nothing, do nothing for a little bit. Maybe not perceptible to us right off the bat without like staring at a bee ass, but like, do nothing for a little bit is effectively the bee's space, and it's able to then do this dance and encode all that information and portray it that way. That's the way that it sounds like it almost could work to me. Is it's this
Eh,
interesting like computerized language.
yes. That like your summation is very close to my general understanding of it. Uh,
Well, that's good because I
I
had no
always try
idea. I
to,
just
yeah,
guessed.
yeah. I always try to explain insects, arthropods in general, but specifically insects, as more or less tiny computers. There's always at zero. It's not as basic as zeros and ones, but it's essentially a thing that's just reacting to a
It's more
stimulus.
analog. They're more like analog
Yeah,
computers.
right. So like if I haven't painted the picture enough yet, but the only two languages that sincerely exist in this universe are some form of mathematics, clearly, and then abstract symbolism to try to explain the mathematics. Uh, so here you have bugs using some mathematical language, or language that is somehow mathematical. But then you have like the sub-perceptible things that happen, like uh, when certain species of grasshopper, when they are running out of food, so they've already eaten a lot of whatever is there, and the population density, the space in between the population gets smaller. So it's like you're corralling all of these bugs into a smaller area. Eventually, they start rubbing up on one another while they're trying to feed on the same plant. Long story short, some of these grasshoppers, if you touch a part of their femur, say it's like 10 times in under 3 minutes, depending on where they're at in their life cycle, they may begin the metamorphic process to become like a locust form rather than a regular grasshopper. So there is some, imperceptible number that has to be hit for some change to be enacted on. I don't want to say like a subconscious level, but on a like an autonomic level of this insect, where it changes the hormone structure and the hormone release and the internal chemistry to make this thing grow brighter colors, grow longer wings, and then have the urge to get all of its brethren and then fly in a direction and find more food.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
like, it
like
just kinda
and
sounds like it's a subroutine, like, it's a literal like, a thread with my computer people will understand what I'm talking about. A thread is basically just at running a function that periodically checks a value that is if leg touched a certain amount of times in some time delta, do this thing.
and then plants will do that too. Like if you're familiar with like the Venus flytrap, they've got little sensory hairs inside of the trap, and it's like if you touch one or any of them in there like three times in 10 seconds or something like that, that's what activates the trap.
Some of them are actually like I think go a little bit faster than that. Like I know that was one of the fun things you could do with them is you could like put your finky finger in the trap and it would just close on it on you. Like it's just cool.
But yeah, uh but yeah, this reminded me too of the Sefer Yetzirah, where things kind of developed from their previous states of being, and each new state of being created a new set of needs that needed to be met. So, kind of back to what Alex was talking about, I personally feel that mathematics as a on a baseline, however it represents without our version of symbolism for it, is just a consequence of being alive or for the universe existing as more than one of anything. So just the mere fact that it's not zero, math inherently at some level needs to exist, and then eventually the language would have to come with it, so that whatever was utilizing it or living with it, it was created as a way to reason, plot, and plan with the self or with the community to figure out something to do with that information that they have. The information or data being math.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I think you nailed it on the head earlier when you said that there's abstract thoughts and there's math, but really it's the fact is like even some schools of thought are talking about the math isn't necessarily real. It's just it is the outgrowth from abstractness. And so like continuing on with our embodied mind theory, some of the subsets of this idea refer to Aristotelian realism, psychologism, and empiricism. But more specifically, I'd like to point out empiricism, which kind of I think goes a little bit within intuitionism, which is that the idea is that um, it's just that mathematics is not possible to be known a priori. Like you can't actually reason out something like the idea of I ate four burritos without actually having once experienced 4 and a burrito and having eaten 4 of them and, like, that sort of maybe not necessarily eating 4 of them, but, like, you have to know what a burrito is, you have to know what the idea of 4 is. You had to have experienced the number 4 at some point to understand that, like, saying that you ate 4 burritos and having that be self-evidently true, um, like, you have to have experienced it is what the empiricism talks about. Um, though, like, the main criticism comes from this and the idea that, like, the idea of 2 plus 2 equals 4 is contingent then on the truth of having observed 2 pairs coming together. So, in other words, the statement by empiricism could be factually uncertain for someone who hasn't seen the phenomena before, such as an infant, despite the widely agreed upon inherent truth of the statement, the sort of axiomatic uh, result of it of 2 plus 2 equals 4. Um, Somebody who has not experienced 2 plus 2 equals 4 could exist in a world where that's not necessarily true. And these theories all sort of circle around the question of math in the same way I think people tend to question and discuss religion and the divine and mystical schools of thought.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back into what I was talking about with things that kind of fall under pseudoscience. And it's this thing is true based on the data we have, kind of a scenario. So for some people, this makes the lines of thought impossible, and I'm going to use big air quotes here because we don't have enough evidence, which is fine. Anything that you or I see in the sky, we can now identify as a UFO at bare minimum. You know, we don't have enough data to say exactly what that is, like Alex's Robin. Uh, but then, who can say if a bear dukes in the woods? We can't confirm that until we have proof that bears do in fact do that. At least one of them has done that. And then even, like Alex said, it's true for everyone with that information or who have faith in the information, but it might not be for the people who just don't accept it. So it seems to me that the sorts of logic like this relies on some type of previous knowledge or understanding that others do not always have. However, unlike Alex, I have had my experiences with religion and spirituality and the paranormal, or at the very least, I've had my experiences that rely on my knowledge and understanding that allowed me to put my two and my two together. Does this mean that my two and two or Alex's two and two are flawed or not? I don't think so. It's just a background of data that we may or may not have that shapes the experience for us.
Right, and that's why I think it's fun and important to talk about the math philosophy in this manner because the I don't bring up the Platonism, formalism, conventionalism combination of the air quotes, thought about mathematician to say that it is the correct way to think of it. It just happens to be the one that most people do. It seems to be the most common of them. Whether or not it's right doesn't mean that it is, the actual most right or yeah, whether or not it is the most utilized doesn't make it the most correct. I actually was recently watching It's Always Sunny, working on a birthday gift for Sabrina, and I watched the episode where the Mac puts the the question of whether evolution is real together because science is wrong sometimes, and that you had who's his face whatever the guy, I think it was Aristotle actually, who was like, "Hey, the universe actually revolves around the Earth." And then some guy Galileo came around along and made him look like a total bitch because it turns out that it doesn't actually revolve around the Earth and that it actually revolves around the sun, and so on and so forth. If you've seen the episode, it's great. All stemming from a serial based car accident, but the thing that I don't like, not to get too far away from what it is that I'm saying is that just because something is widely accepted as what seems to be the case, just like we already talked about in the last episode with Euclideanism, doesn't mean that's actually the way that things are, right?
Right. I think yeah. So another example, kind of like in the modern sphere of things, um, you know, especially right now, science in general is being questioned for good or bad. That's not up to me. But in part, I think it's because too many science heads or aspects of culture, for good or bad, have, I don't want to say that they've gone unchecked, but they've gone long enough where they haven't had to supply data in a correct format. So going back to 2016, maybe 2017, Bill Nye was on the Tucker Carlson show. It's probably the only time I've ever sincerely watched Tucker Carlson, at least at that point in my life. I'm not. Anyway, um, and they were there to debate climate change. And Bill Nye comes in, and this is where I lost all faith in Bill Nye. He came in and just saying like it's just an accepted fact. Like, and Tucker Carlson's whole thing was, well, where's the data? Well, the data's out there. Okay, but why didn't you bring the data with you? Like the impetus for evidence is on you. And I mean that goes both ways when you're coming into a debate, but
Right.
you have somebody who is just, for good or bad, he has this base of knowledge. It's almost like the curse of knowledge where he can come in and say like, yes, this is a fact or this is true. But to other people, they still need the data. They still need the information to be able to buy into that. And what they do with that information is, I guess, neither here nor there after the fact. But there's at least one side of this where you know, If you're trying to explain that 2 plus 2 equals 4, you still need to show the evidence that 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Right. Yeah. Like going, say going away from a, no, we're not gonna necessarily like stray from political or things or one way or another, or sit here and say one way or another about climate change. But if I come to the table to debate with you whether or not 2 plus 2 equals 4, we have to agree what 2 is and we have to agree what 4 is. And then when I take my 2 coins and then I push my other 2 coins together and then I blow your mind, as it turns out that our established understanding of what 4 is and our established understanding of what 2 is, and then I put the two and two together and you see that 4 came out of it, and I there's my empirical evidence. You've experienced the two and the two coming together to be 4. And that's all that basically Tucker was asking for here when it came to this argument of is climate change real? Is that like I'm asking you, is climate change real? He said the rebuttal is, well, it's a proven fact, and then that's like, well, that's not good enough for me as somebody who doesn't necessarily believe want to believe you, because I know that, because people can be bought, right? But the scientific method is not something that can be bought if you do it properly and you're able to show that it's been done correctly. If you are able, which is the whole purpose of having studies and then having them be peer reviewed and having them be repeated and have the results be showing to happen every single time when you have something occur. You can, if you do an experiment, say if we go back to the bee dancing thing, every single hive you observe and measure is probably going to show it within some level of error, because they're obviously real creatures that can make semi mistakes, but it probably will go to show that the bee holes that they make are always within some margin of these measurements. And you can go and repeat that experiment yourself. You can go and measure some bee holes yourself and see that they are within some margin of error, those things. And thus, it's a repeatable experiment that you can then peer review and do yourself. And therefore, there it is factual. It must be the case because you can even go do it yourself, basically. Um, and so that's basically, or that's what it is. That's kind of the purpose of what we try to do with math and with scientific method and with science is, it needs to be like, to say that something is true, you have to be able to do it a bunch, and somebody themselves, if given the right tools, should be able to do it as well and see the same results.
Yeah. So even, when you hear me especially lay into something mystical, magical, supernatural, whatever it is, understand that I am approaching it from the information that I have, and I'm trying to do my best to give the information as I have it, but just don't take my word for it. Like right now, in the spiritual world of real life of TikTok, there's just it's so easy to get caught up in just people, and not even just this, it's anything. Just get caught up into what they're saying, but without the evidence. Um, yeah, I mean, this can be a whole other conversation and rabbit hole and
Well, and it's just, I
uh,
think it goes to show that, like, having a healthy level of skepticism does not make you paranoid and does not make you somebody who is distrusting of science or people of authority. But the whole purpose of not being a drone and being able to find the answers for yourself involves questioning what things people tell you and whether or not they are true, and you doing your own research for these things, like, as far as like dating this episode is concerned, whoever it is that was saying something about Tylenol and autism, it's like, well, okay, did any, if you want to be, first thing, don't just take a whole bunch of don't take a bunch of Tylenol just because you want to prove somebody wrong, right? That's a stupid thing to do. Don't do that.
just burn your liver out.
Don't stop taking Tylenol altogether because somebody else told you not to do it. What you should probably do is go figure out where all of this is being derived from, read the studies, and then make an informed decision of your own by deciding what you can interpret from the studies as they are. Do you believe the sample sizes are bad? A big sample size is very important to making data actually valid. Do you believe that the experiment was performed properly? Did other people perform the same experiment? Were the control groups proper? These are things that, if you're really truly interested in understanding, what it is that was going on with that, that you could go and evaluate for yourself and then have that information. Um, and so obviously it is a lot easier to just listen and suggest and believe scientists or your favorite doctor in terms of like whatever their interpretation is, but the fact of the matter is that people can be bought. And this doesn't matter what side of any sort of aisle you're on, anybody can be bought. Anybody can be asked to interpret data in any one particular manner. And that's just the way it is. But we're getting off of topic a little bit.
No, but it highlights how important this mathematic philosophy is, or mathematic philosophies are, just to get our brains kind of geared and working kind of in a direction, to be able to accept the fact that you should be asking questions, or that there's different schools of thought, is a very healthy thing. And we, especially doing a podcast on the occult or spooky whatever, we need to have at least a baseline in the types of logic that we can approach these things with. Even when it doesn't seem logical, at least we have, point A to start from, and be like, okay, this is established reality. You know,
Well, and
how can we sort through the rest of it?
Well, that's just kind of how general proofs work anyway. Like when you're trying to you work through any sort of problem in math, the typically, at least for proofs by contradiction, which is something I'll go into in other cases, like you do start with an assumption that something is true, and then you try and work yourself into a position where it can't be because you'd established something that contradicts the truthiness of your original assumption. And so, like, you could try and do the same thing with any sort of knowledge that you gain through mysticism. Um, assume, I don't know, I don't remember. I'm off the top of my head as far as like what is it? The experience void versus non-experience void versus whatever we were talking about originally. I don't remember what that was part of as far as that is concerned. But you could probably do your own versions of logic and proofs and everything if you wanted to with the mathematical form in any one thing of your own choice and see if it doesn't like hold up in that way because it's designed to try and be.
I think this is probably a good place to insert something about confirmation bias. But a bias in general is a person's preconceived notions that informs their opinions about something that they perceive, about information coming in to them.
The Oxford Dictionary says that it is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation as of one's existing beliefs or theories. So it's the idea that you already believe that Tylenol causes autism. You already believe that climate change is real. You already believe that dogs can fly, and so new evidence comes in, and thus the you have the confirmation bias is that you have a tendency to interpret the new evidence to confirm what already your worldview, right? Because the brain doesn't want to have its worldview changed because it uses that every day to try and operate, and the the active changing of it messes with your general equilibrium in terms of like trying to operate, and so the confirmation bias is unavoidable.
Yeah, I don't care if you're some hippie yoga mom that thinks that they're a shaman, or you are some hyper pol- politically or politically charged individual. Like, there's always going to be bias. You're always going to be unconsciously or subconsciously looking for things that confirm your beliefs or your ideas. But I think that's truly one of the things that's wrong in the world. Is not I think that's what separates like some people from a lot of other people, is to be able to step back and then test their own theories.
Yeah, no, being able to reevaluate where you stand is very important when it comes to actually being able to stand for something because if you can't justify it yourself, then why are you bothering to try and justify it to anyone else? But anyway, back to
Anyway.
math and more specifically, we're going to talk about one of the things that I think that keeps me satisfied with it, I guess, is a way, or that I sort of lets me have faith or some semblance of belief in math, is the principle of unreasonable effectiveness. And unreasonable effectiveness is the phenomena where many of the sort of purest mathematical theories or principles have applications outside of their initial object. A stupid thing is to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Like if you take 2 oranges and you apply to another 2 oranges, you have 4 oranges. Surprise, that has a very, very real application. But there are some major examples, or kind of, I think, what we have been, between the two of us, been referring to as synchronicities, uh, which is that prime factorization of natural numbers is something that was discovered 2,000 years ago. Like prime numbers have been around forever. The understanding of natural numbers as a set has not been around for nearly as long. Um, but like finding primes, numbers that can only be divided by themselves in one, is very important for what is referred to as RSA encryption of internet connections. Meaning, when I am connected to you for something important like a business transaction, making a payment, or sending a password, it's important that end to end is encrypted so that way people cannot sniff that information and know your password. And to do these things, the RSA encryption algorithm uses large prime numbers. And to get those large primes, you have to be able to figure out whether or not something has factors, right? So if a prime number doesn't have any factors, it can be used in this process. Now, I may have misunderstood a little bit of like what it is that the RSA encryption does, but that's the gist of it, basically. Another example is that a 19th century study of non-Euclidean geometries and manifolds. We're not going to go too deep about what the hell a manifold is exactly, but I think it's more of like a spatial donut in a sense. Like, and we mentioned this when we were talking about Euclid, but these had direct application in Einstein's theory of relativity. Non-Euclidean space dimensions of 4 for special relativity, and general relativity being a curved manifold of dimension 4, which we live in the third dimension. We see things in the third dimension. What type of dimension we perceive or are consciously in, or any of those other things, I don't know. But uh, according to those relativity theories of Einstein, a very smart man who was a very integral part of our current level of understanding of physics, suggested that general relativity in space is some sort of a curved manifold of dimension 4. And it's weird that people were doing this work back in the 18th century, and then it turns out that something that it's possible. Remember, we're going to apply a skepticism here. It's possible that space and time work like this thing that some guy was doing math on like 200 years before somebody else decided to relate it to anything. And even more so when you think about that encryption thing. Speaking of physics, a further example is that you have math driving physics research, such as in the discovery of the positron and the baryon. There's math problems that existed, and the solutions to these problems didn't make any sense and remained unexplained until conjecture suggested that the positron and the baryon, unknown particles at the time, were real. Like, which is crazy. Somebody had a math problem that they couldn't really understand why it was working the way that it was until they discovered new particles that were there, and now suddenly that math problem made sense. And that seems it's unreasonably effective.
See, and I'm going to bring it back to the angels, because it seems for however unlikely something is, there is a mathematical equation for it. Even if it doesn't get applied immediately, at some point there will become a use case scenario. So that does make me curious that if in the development of a form of mathematics or mathematics forming, it automatically creates something in the universe for that math to fulfill the need of.
I mean, maybe that's the trick for why, like, the universe. Maybe that's the trick of how the universe is a simulation, is that we are constantly writing it.
Right. So yeah, it's like writing something into a story. Like, uh, what's his name? Alan Moore talks a lot about how like writing is magic. Like when you read a book, it's a psychedelic experience where you get to visualize these things inside of your head. Some people, at least I do, get to visualize this whole entire world. And they created this with just letters.
Yeah, good stories take you on some kind of a thing. You feel things like, as the characters die, you have those same you get those emotions. You know, you feel the same rage. You find yourself hating people in the story that aren't real and didn't matter to you up until the time that you put these magical little like writing pieces on these pages together for yourself.
Or like something more ridiculous, like if you're familiar with the Far Side comic Cow Tools, the universe did all a series of mathematics to get somebody to write this comic about tools that just don't exist.
Yeah,
Now it's going to be funny if at some point it becomes this meta thing where like the universe spit out this artwork, but then at some point it's going to spit out those tools are for. We just haven't gotten there yet.
maybe. Cow Tools is funny. Look up. There's a lot on Cow Tools. I'm sure, listener, please just go do your own research on Cow Tools. That's a whole thing.
Yeah, like I don't know if the dude meant to, but it becomes like this whole philosophical like conundrum and larger conversation. And like I just touched on, like, does the nature of the universe create cow tools? And then something eventually picks up the tool to be able to use it when that time is there, when the
Yeah,
universe knows how to use that tool. Fascinating. It's like some chalk zone shit.
yeah. No, but actually, and I mean, I think this principle then, and I mentioned this already, is sort of the this unreasonable effectiveness is likely where my faith in math lies, right? That regardless of the school's thoughts that we've already discussed, there's something kind of eerie and wonderful about this constructed language of quantization and relationship that manages to properly explain everyday phenomena in a way that transcends language boundaries. You know, any high school graduate from any country with a decent education system should be able to look at the Pythagorean theorem and know what's going on there. You know, I believe and there are other scientists who have gotten this belief from that if we ever do encounter aliens, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, that like the only reliable way to communicate with them will be via illustrating math because they don't know what an A is and they're not going to know what a 2 is. But they are going to know they'll will recognize the shape of a triangle and they'll understand that you are trying that the symbols that you're putting together to talk about the triangle are something that they can it's not gonna be the Pythagorean theorem to them, it's gonna be the fucking zip zop zoobity bop, you know, theorem that they've got in their alien language. But, they'll see that the A corresponds to the hypotenuse, the B corresponds to the side of whatever, and the symbols all being performed together and the relationship and all that, they can see it with their eyes and understand. And just because they flew however many light years to get here, they didn't just suddenly forget how triangles work.
Right. And I think, again, it has so much to do with semantics in our world. And it gets frustrating for me that humans, with all of our wisdom and all of the knowledge that we have as a whole, still can't figure out that we're playing a game that comes with instructions in a multitude of languages. We just feel that the languages that the humans have come up with is the language. And math appears to be the Rosetta Stone for those languages, or at least one of them. Like Alex was saying, through math, you could find a way to communicate with an entity, regardless of whether it's some celestial being, an alien. If I'm sure if animals could be cognizant enough to figure out what we were doing, math is going to be at the forefront of that communication. Um, but again, this is not so different from what the old head Hebrews taught us in the Kabbalah. You can't know a thing by observing it directly. You can only know a thing by its relation to other things, because a thing just is. But it's not until you start describing its qualities that you are subjecting that thing to layers of metaphor that anybody with a certain data set can agree upon. So, like I've talked about it before, but the prototypical golden dawn meditation of the point on the graph. A point is only a point until it's provided context. It's not even point A until point B is manifested.
No, absolutely. Like that's exactly I agree with that 100%, right? And I think that I'd have to look back and see which one of these it was, which is, um, you can't know a thing by observing it directly, and you can only know a thing by its relation to other things. I think that's sort of where you you sort of outgrow from you know something, and then you have to kind of and we have all these rules, and that's how you can then further get from there. It's basically the. Actually, I don't know where I was going with that. Cut all that out. Um, yeah.
No, but
Well, no, but yeah, you're
like
right.
even something simple, like a cup. Like there was a point in your life where you didn't know what a cup was,
Yeah.
but you know what a cup is now because you know things go in it. You know, your cup might be made out of metal or glass or plastic or just whatever. Like you think of the concept of a cup. You don't think of what a cup is at its core essence. Because at its core essence is really just an idea.
Yeah, the idea of holding water.
Right.
How do you hold the water? And if you want to
You
go
have a
even
concave structure that's made out of a thing that's not water soluble,
right,
yada, yada,
and
yada.
it turns out that's a lot of things actually, because it could be a bucket or a tub
Yeah.
or a. And what makes a bucket or a tub not a cup? I don't know, but I guess a bucket has a handle, but so does a coffee mug. But maybe that's what makes it a mug. And so now you start getting into it's actually funny. Sabrina sent me a video today about how like, you've got the Dewey Decimal System of books and how that basically lets you map out in more and more discrete and descriptive points on like you've got cookbooks, but then you've got cookbooks of this particular type and then sub cookbooks of that, and it just adds a decimal point onto it to further categorize what is effectively still all a cookbook, right? And how she watched some video about a guy who wanted to do it to grocery stores and have there be a Dewey Decimal System, or rather his a Chewy Decimal System for grocery stores. And I feel like with the archetypes and with the ideas of all these different things, cup is some point in the sort of thingy's decimal system, and then from that point, and then obviously above that, it's holders of water, and cup is one of them, and then the subtypes of cup might be mug, right? And that's because that's cups with handles.
Right. It's like the what Lon Milo Duquette taught us. Like there was a need for rest. There's a general need for rest in the universe. So there has to be things with which to fulfill that. So you have things that you can lay or sit upon. And then you have your couches, your chairs, your beds, your whatever. But we're looking at chairs, you know,
Etc.
uh, so on and so forth, all the way down to the chair that you're sitting
Right. You do it for cups. Cups happen to be that I needed water, but I don't need all of the water. I just need some of the water right now, and then I'll need a little bit more water later.
in.
Versus like drinking directly from the faucet is I need the all the water on demand as much as I can get, right? Or the water fountain or whatever, versus the cup, which is that I would like to ingest this water leisurely over the course of a series of moments in my life.
So now that we're starting to make these kind of points, I think it's a fair time to ask, how do you feel about like the occult knowledge now that we can see mathematic principles applied to components of it?
Well, I think that there's let me think about that for a second actually. Um because I think that maybe is like what we've talked about before in this case, where like all these scientists or these sort of men of men of math and science have tended to find a lack of absurdism, I guess is a way to think about it, in the mystical, right? Maybe not necessarily in anything religious, but in sort of thinking about existence in this mystical manner. That because of how you can almost think of it as there's an unreasonable congruence, and not quite an unreasonable effectiveness now, but like math is unreasonably effective at describing the physical world in its relationships through the quantization and through the string manipulation that allows you to solve these problems, and that there's maybe some sort of unreasonable congruence that happens to crop up with mathematical philosophy and mystical philosophy. And I think I get it. I get why they would want to, why they found some semblance of faith or belief in this, or why they found some comfort in it because it works within a lot of the like ways of thinking that they already do.
Yeah, so for me, it's like if you approach magic, well, I guess if you start with the beginning point, the impetus of everything is some form of mathematics. And then you could take that to extremes, and mathematics eventually becomes biology. It becomes a dog, it becomes a cat, it becomes whatever. It becomes population dynamics, it becomes fluid dynamics, it becomes chemistry, it becomes physics. I think one of the things that is probably the problem with spiritualists, or people who are ooky spooky, is they are approaching it from the nebulous component first, but not trying to make that physical connection with something tangible.
Sure.
I don't think we're going to be the first ones to break the code. I think Alex and I are effectively like just modern research occultists at this point. By I don't know what any other name. We don't necessarily have to have like a larger spiritual component to it. Like I do, Alex may not, but we're still finding common ground in mathematics, or at least in the philosophies of mathematics, and seeing how they apply to different components of things that I believe, or things that I know or understand. Um, which I think is great. Because this stuff goes however long. I think it demystifies it a little bit, but for as many questions as it brings up, it's just going to create other questions down the line. It just like it
That's our job,
kind of adds
right?
some cement to it.
That's our job here is that, while we might not have been like while this may not have been like esoteric in the normal occult or mystical sense of what we talk about sometimes, or at least what we've been introduced to us from our current or previous content, I hope that it still made you the listeners like head hurt. Like it should still provoke thought, and it should still make you wonder, like, and want to look and do more of your own research, because like it it's not something that you're going to be able to get from us talking. This is us introducing you to cool stuff that we went and did our own sort of ruminations and things on. I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people maybe don't necessarily give a lot of the thought to the underlying machinations and metaphysics of mathematics, despite how you're very easily doing it at all times constantly. Your brain has a circadian rhythm that has to be kept by some measure of times. It's got some sort of metronome in it that's able to know that the daytime is this amount of time and the nighttime is this amount of time. And when you sleep, you have a quantization of the amount of sleep that you got. If you are like, at least like me, where I just get up at the same time every day for some reason. Um, your brain has that circadian rhythm. Each key you type on the keyboard is carefully calculated to be struck in a similar force and at an exact location in an organized sequence. Your brain is constantly queuing up those things, like and not even not your actual like living brain that you drive most of the time. Some underlying system has, what word you want to type, but then there's some sort of like background thread that basically queues up all of the muscle motions for you, especially for like really fast typers like the stenographers and stuff. They're crazy in terms of like what it is they're pulling off. I'm like, when you throw a ball to your dog, the brain has to decide how much force it's using in creating the desired throwing trajectory. Computers are the result of an unfathomable amount of mathematics happening so fast that we could never hope to perceive even a fraction of it. And so, like, even if it's, fairly mundane on the surface, and it's the thing you have to do to balance your budget or decide how many oranges you need for uh, an orange tart, right? It certainly has as deep and expansive of anything else worth thinking about, in this curious existence we have.
I really don't know what else to say about it. It's just math just kind of is, and I it, I've learned a lot going over this stuff with you. Like I understand that this is probably just touching the surface of a lot of math. Clearly, like if there's enough to explain most things, or at least everything that we know of in the universe, we have something to have a mathematical something about it. Um, I don't know. Just the whole thing has kind of blown me away, and even to the point where we've been able to connect different things from, we talked about insect biology and the spiritual components. We see real life examples, or mystical life examples, either way,
Yeah.
of this. And it's, again, like the thought processes that you have that you don't even know. Like, one of the things that I've become highly aware of, like kind of going along this line, of thinking, is, and I don't know if you do this or if other people will do this, but sometimes I have to pause in the middle of what I'm saying because my brain is working faster than my mouth, or vice versa. Like, I either have a lag, like I know what I need to be saying, but there's a lag in it coming out, or I'm saying it much quicker and I have in my head, and I have to have my mouth like match the speed.
No,
So
absolutely.
my real life example right now of those, the components that are lifting up out of your subconscious mind, or your autonomic nervous system, or whatever it is, and then having it be expressed through a communication of your conscious and unconscious mind.
All imperceptibly so. Silent, as I like to use the word, that these underlying processes, completely horrifying in some ways. But I'd say, but this kind of marks, I'd say that we could just tidy up point here. This marks the end of the first episode on math. We're gonna definitely be doing more math, but we won't be talking philosophically. The goal is likely to do interesting and cool mathematical stuff and talk about them in the relation of the mystical and how they sort of relate to those sort of those magical and occult ideas, right? But I wanted to start somewhere similarly meta as we did with starting in the Kabbalah, and then allow for more branching into these interesting and weird things that show up in math. So I hope you guys did like listening as much as we do making this stuff. So until next time, touch us on the internet, do the like, comment, subscribe. Go maybe throw down there what kind of what your favorite school of thought is, or what you feel like is the best works for you as far as your thoughts on math.
Yeah, I think that's it. So with that, we'll see you next time. Go. Goodbye,
Deuces.
everybody.